Hey, Newfangled. Let me know on Edmodo once you're able to see me, and welcome to Digital Chat number 3 about Markus Zusak's The Book Thief. I am obviously not Anna Wilson, but I am standing in for Anna today to talk about this section of The Book Thief. We are talking about pages just 1 second, let me make sure I have this right, 277 to page 411. Hopefully you've kept up with this section. This is just an incredibly emotional part of the book. I feel like we see a lot of development happening with our characters. Things are really escalating both in Death's world, with everything happening in World War II, and he kind of introduces this secondary narrator type character, kind of, vague notion of a character in war, who he says keeps hounding him, just get it done, get it done, get it done. So we see that the war is expanding, we see that things are progressing, and like I said, once you are able to see me, please go ahead and say hi on Edmodo. It looks like we don't have any viewers just yet. I'm going to go ahead and put up a question for you guys to just get us all started. So like I said, things are escalating in Liesel's world. People are all incredibly fleshed out at this point. This is one of my favorite books to use as an example for three-dimensional characters. And when I say three-dimensional characters, I mean you don't, in this book, have a whole lot of stock characters. So you don't have anybody that really follows a stereotype. Everybody has this beautiful quality of being a real person. And right now, so we have all of these incredibly fleshed out characters, and we have in mind, one of the most lovable casts of characters of any book that I have personally ever read. This is one of my favorite books of all time. But the book itself is called The Book Thief, and Death has already kind of introduced the book thief person as being Liesel. So what you really can do, though, usually you imagine that if a book is titled after somebody, they're going to be the most profound character in the book, but I don't find that to be necessarily true of this book. So you can argue that this book isn't just about Liesel's experience. Whose viewpoint do you think is the strongest, and whose story do you think is the most compelling? So that is the introduction question that I'm going to post for you on Edmodo. Let me get that up for you guys. And remember, we're talking in the Book Thief small group chat on Edmodo, so make sure when you're responding to questions, or when you're looking for questions, you're finding them there and then responding to them in that same chat feed. I haven't had anybody say hi yet, but go ahead and say hi by just responding to that question, and we'll kind of start plugging right along. Hopefully we get some people that are joining us later on in this session so that we can talk about it. All right, so moving right along, like I said, we just have an absolutely brilliant section. We have a lot of very emotional scenes in this part of the book, scenes that I think are just incredibly profound. You have some that are incredibly touching. You have some, like Death's description of visiting the death camps for the first time, that are just very, very terrible and really draw on the horror of this period of time, even though we might not see too much of that happening in Molking right now. Obviously, we're starting to see a lot more of it. We see that the SS are coming around and looking for air shelters. Looks like we have one viewer, yay! Thanks for joining us. Go ahead and say hi on Edmodo if you have time. All right. So we see that the SS are coming around and assessing people's homes and seeing if they're there for air raid shelters, and that was a scene that was just incredibly tense. And I mean, I remember reading this for the first time, and I was so terrified for everyone, because really Death lets you know very early on in the book, like, this is not a happy story. Things are not going to work out well for a lot of the people that are in this book. So as we read further and further and we get more of those elements of foreshadowing from our narrator, Death, I know that when I first read it, I was just waiting for the ball to drop and waiting for something to happen or someone to be lost in this whole shuffle of chaos that is World War II in this book. So again, just for everybody that's joining us, thank you for joining us for the chat. Today we're talking about pages 277 through 411. And there is a question. That is okay. Thank you, Nicole, for joining us. Thanks for saying hi. We have our opening question up on the chat right now. So the question that I have for you is, whose viewpoint in the book do you think is the strongest? And whose story is the most compelling for you? So when I say the most compelling, it could just be the person that you relate to the most. It could be the person that you find to be most touching in the story. It could just be the character that you have as a favorite. So I would love for you guys to respond to that question, because I know that there are so many wonderful characters in this story, and especially as we start to see, again, some of these different moments of tension coming up. So like the SS officers coming around. Later on, we have Max, and he gets sick because of the snow that's brought down into the basement in yet another wonderful scene from this section. But he's sick, and we don't know if he's going to pull through. And then we have a hilarious scene of Rosa walking into Liesel's classroom and yelling at her and calling her Zaumensch, and just really carrying on about that, but really it turns out to be one of the most touching scenes in the story, in Liesel and Rosa's story for me, because Rosa has taken this harsh persona that she had at the beginning of the book, and she has used that to kind of foster a situation where she is able to show this more touching and really just emotional side of herself. And she knows that Liesel cares so much for Max that she needs to know as soon as he's awake and as soon as he's ready to go. But the whole scene of Max, we don't know whether he's going to pull through, and there's this incredibly tense scene of Rosa and Hans sitting in the kitchen and just kind of going through and saying, what are we going to do? What are we going to do if he dies? How are we going to fix this situation? And obviously nobody is hoping for his death, but it's very much a reality of their situation right now. That's a huge fear. And then later we find that Rudy has done incredibly well in the athletic competitions, and he's kind of captured the attention of the SS officers in their town. So he's kind of been marked for their attention, and that in Germany at this time, at this point in time, was not a good thing if you didn't agree with what the Nazis were saying. So we can see a lot of rising tension coming from that. Rudy is one of my darling characters in this book, and as soon as I read that line again, I was like, oh, I forgot about this, and oh my gosh, this is terrible. So we're just going to get started right off the bat from the very beginning of our section, page 277. It's called Sketches, and again, a very touching scene. Liesel is down with Max, and she sneaks a peek at this book of drawings that he has created. So he wrote the Standover Man for her and illustrated it, but now he has started keeping a record of his own personal stories. He's using his words to document his feelings and to really try to process what is happening to him and what is happening throughout all of Europe at this time, really. So we get to see a really, a very interesting progression of his thought. And then we also get to see his artwork, some of which is humorous, and some of which is not. And Liesel comes to find that exact same realization. And she sneaks a peek at this and then feels absolutely ashamed that she was looking at Max's personal things, and horrified of the images that are present in his mind, because she and him have kind of shared their dreams throughout the book so far, and the fact that he's having these terrible, terrible visions and thoughts and dreams, she just really couldn't picture the gravity of the situation. So one thing that I found to be probably one of the most remarkable lines in the book is when Max just says, or a voice startled her. Dankeschön, it said, and when she looked across, following the trail of sound to its owner, a small sign of satisfaction was present on his Jewish lips. So it's talking about Max. Why do you think Max is thanking Liesel for looking at his drawings? what do you think his thought process is in looking at what she is experiencing there? And what did you personally think of the drawings? Did you find them to be as harsh as Liesel did? Did you find them to be a source of anger like Max does? What did you think of them? Hello, Brooke! I'm glad that you were able to join us. Okay, so it looks like Megan and Zach are also online. Welcome, all of you. I hope you are having fantastic weeks so far. You are so close to spring break. Hold in there until next week. But for now, let's talk about Book Thief, obviously. So Brooke posted that she was overjoyed when Max woke up and stayed alive. She almost cried. I was right there with you, Brooke. Every single time I just have to hold my breath when Max is sick, and I know he's going to wake up, but every single time it is just so tense for me. So for all of you guys joining us, there is an opening question down lower. It is kind of like a paragraph of text, so it might not look like a question at first. But the question for you is, the book is called The Book Thief, aka Liesel Meminger. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but like the Book Thief is Liesel. So, but you can also argue that this book is not just about Liesel's experience, whose viewpoint is the strongest, and whose story is the most compelling for you. So not necessarily asking you for your favorite character, although you can definitely include that in your discussion down at that question. Okay, so moving right along, if you guys have any questions, of course, please post them up there. You guys are so good at coming up with your own questions, and you're so good at responding to each other's questions. I absolutely love it. All right, and Zach has responded to the question about the drawings. He thought that the drawings were neat, and it is really cool to see them incorporating a bit of like graphic art rather than just textual art, you know, like writing, into the book. I personally love graphic novels, so anytime I can have images included along with my words and have that deepen the meaning, I am so appreciative of that. And I think that all of the different graphic elements, including the Standover Man and these drawings, really, really add to the story here. Because you can read about something that is as terrible as a pile of bodies on which you have two people saying, like, commenting, "Isn't it a lovely day?" But seeing it is something entirely different. It strikes a different chord in your mind to be able to see that image versus just reading about it. Do you guys agree with me on that? Do you think that it is sometimes more difficult to see an image of something rather than read it? I know that when I'm watching scary movies, I can often get more caught up in the details of it, but when I'm reading something, it's like, oh, I can catch all of the details, and yes, I feel the momentum of like the horror, but at the same time, it doesn't seem to have quite the same effect on my mind as when I'm watching a movie or something like that. So another question for you guys. Go ahead and respond on Edmodo. Cool, let's move on. Okay, so we see Rudy really get a little downtrodden in this section. He gets kind of beat up by, not only has he been beat up by Victor earlier in the story, he is now being kind of victimized by, I think it's Franz Deutscher. But really just terrible beatings and like pushed down in the manure, and of course I just am fearful for him at this time because he's Rudy and he's supposed to be sunshine and rainbows and this constant presence of positivity. And in this section, on page 82, those numbers are really hard to read. 282, the very last line in that first section says, "Today, Rudy was all out of laughter and lies." So you know that Rudy is now being profoundly affected by what is happening in Germany around him. So we definitely see it starting to affect even the most upbeat of our characters, and you can see it seeping into everyone's lives, little bits at a time. All right, so we are now moving on, and we see that part 6 is called The Dream Carrier. Dreams so far in this story have been such a connector of people, and they've symbolized a lot of different things. So why do you think the title The Dream Carrier is significant? And what have dreams meant in the story so far? So, and a follow-up to that question is actually for the next title of the next book that comes up in the story, A Song in the Dark. Um, so that title in and of itself, A Song in the Dark, is incredibly poetic, and it has a lot of hidden meaning just in those few words that go into making the title. So do you think that that name has any meaning? Do you think that it has any significance for the rest of the story? I'll go ahead and post that for you guys. All right, and let me just refresh to see if we have any more responses from you. Okay, Brooke responded to Max thanking Liesel about the drawings, and Brooke says, in the book it said that Max wanted Liesel to read the story when she was older, and when he thought she would be old enough, and he thanked her because it meant that he didn't have to go through the pain of giving her the book about what he had to go through, and she did it for him. The drawings were creative. So definitely drawings were creative, and this is definitely a book that Max wants to give to Liesel when she's older and able to understand the situation a little more. One of the things that I thought he was really thanking her for, and obviously it's a plethora of things, a plethora of reasons why he's thanking her, but I really thought that he thanked her because she is a German girl, and she's looking at this portrayal of Max's people, his friends, his family, and what they're going through, and she is horrified by it. When so much of Germany is just going along with what is happening and thinking that nothing is wrong. So I really thought that a lot of his thanks came from the point of him saying, thank you for being horrified. Thank you for validating the experience of me and also my people, because this is a terrible thing, and you as a child are able to recognize that. So how is the rest of the world not able to recognize it? So that was what I took out of a lot of it, but obviously, Brooke, you're spot on with that too. Okay, so let me see if there's any more. All right, Brooke has also responded to the question about viewpoints and who you think is the strongest story in the book for you, and she says Rudy's viewpoint is the strongest because he has to go through things that he doesn't tell anybody, and his is the most interesting. I like Rudy's story too because he is supposed to be this amazing like ball of sunshine and lemons and happy things. Yellow is generally considered a happy color, and that is the color that I assign to Rudy every single time they mention colors in this. So you could say a lot of the different characters in this book can be portrayed by many different colors, but I think that Rudy's color through and through is yellow, happiness. And you're starting to see that little bits of that are being drained away from him. Zach thinks that Liesel's story is the most compelling. That would make sense since the book's title is The Book Thief. And Megan believes that Max's viewpoint is the strongest. So it's really cool to see that each of you guys have picked a different person as the strongest character for you, as the strongest and most compelling story for you. And obviously nobody is correct on that. We all are going to have very different opinions on it, but I think that arguments can be made for every single one of the characters in this book as the most compelling story. And it really depends on where you're coming from and what your own experiences are, which is the cool part of being a reader. You get to have those opinions. Okay, cool. So Megan has also responded to the Dream Carrier and A Song in the Dark and said, a song in the dark sounds like a light in a pit of darkness or a hero in a place full of villains, which is such a cool way to look at it, Megan. I would not have, I mean, that is just a really incredible thing to say about it. And A Song in the Dark, we also start thinking about all of the different bomb shelters that are being established, and we have a few different air raids that happen in our section later. So think about darkness and what's happening in those air raid shelters, and just hold that in your mind as we continue to read more in the sections too. I might have been a little premature in asking that question. Okay, cool. Thank you guys so much for answering those questions. I'm so glad that you guys are excited about discussing this. Okay, so we also are hitting a point where Death is announcing that we have reached the second half of our story, and that's on page 310, just before the scene with the snowman, which is such an amazing scene. So this is the second half of A Book Thief, he says. Why do you think Death makes a point of pointing out that we are now heading into the second half of the story? Do you think that is significant? And what do you think is his purpose behind saying we are entering the second half of A Book Thief? Because that's an incredibly interesting way of putting it. He doesn't say we're entering the second half of the book or the story. He says of A Book Thief. So what do you think he's hinting at when he says that? I'll go ahead and put that up there for you guys to talk about. Cool beans. All right. So tons more to cover. We have 9 minutes left. Okay, the snowman scene is one of my favorite scenes in the entire book because you have all of these terrible things that are happening around them, and Liesl brings this small piece of joy that most of us, we really don't think about, like, oh, being able to go out and touch the snow and feel it and be outside and be freezing, you know, and experience the cold. For me, personally, when it's winter, I just want to hurry inside as quickly as I can to avoid the cold. But Max is fascinated, and he is in rapture by this snowball fight that they start having in the basement. Obviously, it later has very bad consequences, but I just find it to be one of the coolest scenes in the book. And notice I'm pointing out a lot of different scenes that you can think about. So just keep in mind that I'm touching on scenes because one of my questions later is going to be specifically about scenes for you. So I'm giving you options as we're going along. All right. So now we get to the point where Max is getting sick. And he's getting so sick that Rosa and Hans don't think he's going to make it through. And we get to the chapter called 13 Presents. And I found this to be an incredibly odd chapter because the very first present that Liesl gives to Max is a deflated ball that gets run over by a truck. Not many people would view that as a very good gift. So Liesl starts caring for Max in many ways while he's sleeping and trying to fight off this sickness. She reads to him, talks to him, and starts bringing him presents. What kind of present do you think is a deflated ball? And why did Liesl choose to give that to Max? I just found it to be very odd. And I'm wondering if you guys have any ideas about that. So that's going up on Edmodo. You guys can respond to it there. Megan is responding to, oh, okay, so we have a couple more responses to the titles of the books, which are incredibly influential and incredibly important to the story. So Zach says, A Song in the Dark sounds like a dark town full of despair. Definitely, you get those like really dark elements. Obviously, dark is included in the title of the book, and then you have also just this idea of sound coming out of darkness. And for me, personally, that is something that I find to be incredibly ominous. Like, if you're in the middle of a dark room or a dark forest or a dark town or a dark bomb shelter, and you just all of a sudden start hearing a song, that could either be incredibly ominous or it could also be very uplifting. So think about what songs mean to people most of the time. Songs can mean a whole lot of different things, but think about what they might mean in this context. So definitely, it sounds like a dark town full of despair, and that's what they're really getting at, especially with that word dark. They want you to think of this really drastic situation. Okay, Brooke says, the dreams had connected people together. For example, Liesl was connected with Max through their nightmares. A song in the dark means that anyone can do anything, and the air raid shelters are dark, and Liesl read in the dark like a song. Very good, Brooke. That's what I took out of it. So, Zach also comments, with someone standing up to it. So a dark town full of despair, with someone standing up to it or giving into the darkness. So definitely, all of you guys are right along the same lines, which is really cool to see you all having kind of the same ideas, but having different takes on it. Okay, so other questions. About this being kind of the halfway point of A Book Thief, not necessarily the book thief or the book, but A Book Thief. Megan says he probably did that because it was the second half of the thief's life, or that it is the second half of the book thief's life that was written. Okay, a good way to put it, especially when there's so much emphasis placed on words in this book. Words themselves take on their own little life, really. And Brooke says, usually in a story, the second half is when the book begins to reach its most important part and it will start to go down. Basically, something bad is going to happen. Very true, Brooke. All right, and it hints that the book thief might die. Oh my gosh, that's what you're predicting, Megan? Okay, well, we're going to see what happens at the end of this, and we're going to talk about it next week. Just a reminder, everyone, we're going to be watching The Book Thief movie adaptation here at the Coeur d'Alene Public Library. It's going to start at 6 p.m. We are not going to be in the community room this time. We are going to be in the children's library, and we're going to be in the story room. So we have a big projector screen in there. We have a projector all set up. We're going to have snacks, and we're going to have a lot of great discussion about this. So be here at the Coeur d'Alene Library at 6 o'clock. Next Thursday, the 24th of March, and it'll be a really, really great discussion, and I fully anticipate all of you being incredibly touched by the ending of this story. Okay, and Zach has responded to the presents question. He says, what kind of present is the deflated ball? Why did Liesl give it to Max? To show what might happen to her heart if Max does not make it. Oh my gosh! I had never even thought about that. That is one of the greatest little pieces of information that you could possibly take out of that. I did not even think of making that comparison, Zach, so that is awesome. And Brooke says she gave it to him because she knew that he could relate to the ball because the ball has been beaten up but is still there. You guys are so good at pulling meaning out of these wonderful little tidbits that Markus Zusak has included in this book. So A++ for everyone. All right, moving on. Rudy's in a race. He wins 3 medals and chooses not to win that 4th because he doesn't want to be like his idol Jesse Owens. Is that really why he chose not to win the last medal? Why did Rudy not take his medals home? I'm going to rush through all of these questions and kind of post them up on Edmodo for you so you can respond to them and so that we can cover most of the section. Okay, so another thing that I really wanted to talk to you guys about. Words in this section, more so than ever before, are starting to take on a life of their own. And that's really what Death has kind of been foreshadowing up until this point. He has been saying that the words are going to burst out of her when she is finally able to grasp them and take control. So he has been warning us that this is coming, and the words are starting to get more insistent, and they're described in that way. So just a couple of things that I wanted to read for you. The book thief did not retreat. She took a few extra steps and sat down. Her cold hands felt for her sleeves, and a sentence dropped from her mouth. He's not dead yet. The words landed on the table and positioned themselves in the middle. All 3 people looked at them. Half hopes didn't dare rise any higher. He isn't dead yet. He isn't dead yet. So the words there are just really making themselves very prominent in the story. Another part where they're talking about the words, this is right after the SS officers leave from doing their inspection of the basement. And at the very bottom of page 345, they're describing Max, and Markus Zusak says his armpits were soggy and the words felt like injuries from his mouth. So another sentence that is specifically describing words and what they can feel like. And then later on page 354, he says, when the time came to write, I remember clearly what Liesl Memminger had to say about that summer. A lot of the words have faded over the decades. The paper has suffered from the friction of movement in my pocket, but still, many of her sentences have been impossible to forget. So you hear now that Liesl is starting to tell her story. And you know now that her story isn't just a story, it's words. And words have such an important place in this book. So just keep noticing how words are described as you go through your reading, because there's some really cool things that the author does with the characterization of words and creating a character out of them instead of just talking about them. Okay, so so we are at the end of our time, but I have one more wonderful scene to present to you, and it is when one of the air raids is going on, and Max sneaks from the basement and steals, much like a thief, much like a book thief, the sky. And that to me is just a beautiful scene for him to look at the sky and just say, oh, this is what I have been missing, despite the danger to himself. So we talked about a lot of different scenes and a lot of different ways that they can affect us. So my wrap-up question for you today is, there are many scenes in this section that are profound. Which scene did you find in this section to be most important or the most moving, and why? So that's going to go up on Edmodo for you guys. And just another reminder, we're going to be having our movie night next Thursday. I hope you guys can make it. We'll be posting the final question for the Book Thief soon onto Edmodo, so keep an eye out for that. And Brooke, you're trying to teach yourself German. I did the exact same thing when I finished this book because I just could not pronounce anything that was in here. And I just felt like I really needed to learn that in order to truly understand what was happening in this book. So that's really cool that you're going through and doing that. All right. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and keep responding to those Edmodo posts. I'm going to check later tonight and see if I can write back to all of you guys. But I hope you have a great afternoon. Go out and enjoy this beautiful sunshine that we're getting right now and appreciate the sky like Max would.